In despair, she married the paralyzed son of a millionaire. And a week later, she began to notice strange things. Hello, my dear ones. Put aside your business for a minute. I want to tell you a story that will help you look at your loved ones in a new way. Right where you are watching us from. We wish you a pleasant listening. A little table at the gas station of the oil tycoon. Circular motions, just like her mother had taught her. Until it shines, Tansy, until your conscience is clear. The rag slid over the plastic surface, leaving damp streaks that disappeared at once. From the outside it might have seemed that the woman was absorbed in her work, but her thoughts were far away. Tansy stole a glance at the clock. An old Timex with a worn leather strap, inherited from her mother. The only memory of her, apart from faded photographs in an album and a few letters hidden in a redwood box. 7:15. Soon the end of the shift, which meant she could run to the hospital to see Sophia. For the third day now, her daughter had been lying there after another seizure. The seizure struck Sophia right at school, during a math lesson. The teacher, a young girl only a year out of college, panicked and called an ambulance. Later, crying, she told Tansy how her 8-year-old daughter first froze at the blackboard, then started convulsing. They never even told us about this in college, she sobbed. This never used to happen to children. Tansy had heard that phrase thousands of times. This never used to happen. From old school doctors, from her neighbor across the hall, from the woman at the bakery. But it never made things easier. It didn't used to happen. And now it did. Just like so many other things that didn't used to exist. For example, expensive medicines that made your vision go dark, or fathers who abandoned their families the moment their child was diagnosed. You'll scrub a hole in that table, Tansy, cashier Nancy Williams chuckled, a woman nearing retirement age with kind eyes and lips always painted with pink lipstick. Once she had worked as an engineer at an electrical plant. And when the plant closed down, as she put it, she went wherever they would take her. You'd better hurry home, dear. Or straight to the hospital. How's your Sophia? Tansy just nodded, trying to steady the trembling in her hands. She didn't want to talk. The gas station at the city entrance buzzed like a hive. End of the workday, the busiest time. Truckers stopped to grab a bite, office workers pulled in to fuel up on the way home, teenagers in used Chevrolets bought energy drinks and cigarettes. Numbers spun in Tansy's head, $500 for an exam, $700 for a consultation with a neurologist in the capital, and that's not counting the medications her daughter had to swallow by the handful. Carbamazepine $20, neuroleptin $30, calcium D3 $15, plus vitamins, plus special nutrition. Where could she get that kind of money if a cleaner's salary barely reached $400 a month? The disability benefit was a drop in the ocean. Child support from her ex-husband came 2 or 3 months late, and only after endless calls to the bailiffs. We can't find him, they answered indifferently, yet Brad wasn't hiding at all. Judging by his social media page, he was living in Miami now with his new wife, sunbathing on the beach and sailing yachts. And not once in the last 3 years had he called his daughter. Tans, just look, he's here himself. Nancy Williams suddenly whispered, nervously smoothing her bangs that had slipped out from under her uniform cap. John Peterson in person. In a blue suit, with security. This can't mean anything good, mark my words. Layoffs, probably. Tansy flinched, pulled from her bitter thoughts. She had only ever seen the owner of the oil tycoon gas station chain on the corporate calendar hanging in the break room, a stern man with graying hair and a sharp gaze, like a former soldier. They said that after the financial crisis he started with a single stall at the market, selling cigarettes and chewing gum, and now he owned half the businesses in their town. And 4 gas stations, one of which was the very one where Tansy had worked for 5 years. His Mercedes is parked outside, the guard by the door, Nancy Williams went on in a whisper, glancing at the storeroom door. And Michael's shut in with him, been talking for 40 minutes. They're not shouting, so maybe it'll be fine. Michael Stevenson, their shift manager, a former soldier who had served in Iraq. A fair man, but strict. He respected Tansy for her diligence, sometimes even let her leave early when Sophia was feeling worse. The storeroom door swung open and two men came out. Michael with an impassive face and a man in a flawless blue suit. John Peterson himself, though he looked younger than on the calendar. No guards were in sight. Catching sight of Tansy, Michael gave her a nod. "Tansy, drop by my office after your shift," he muttered, hurrying past with some papers in his hands. "He asked for you personally." He flicked his eyes toward John Peterson, who was already heading for the exit, talking into his phone as he walked. Tansy's heart dropped. Was it layoffs? Or had they noticed how she sometimes took leftover food from the cafeteria for Sophia? There was a strict ban on that, but Michael usually looked the other way. Her hands shook from nerves, and the plastic cup of a customer's half-finished tea she was clearing from the table nearly slipped to the floor. "Don't you worry," Nancy Williams whispered, noticing her state. "He wouldn't come himself over a leftover sandwich. Maybe it's a bonus. Remember last year, for March 8th, they gave everyone $100. Tansy nodded, but the anxiety wouldn't let go. Lately, talk of layoffs had become more frequent. Crisis, sanctions, falling demand. Where would she find a job with such a flexible schedule if they fired her? Who would hire a single mother with a disabled child? The remaining hour of her shift dragged on endlessly. Tansy performed her usual duties mechanically. She cleaned the toilets, wiped down the tables in the cafeteria, took out the trash. Dark thoughts churned in her head. What if Sophia had another seizure? What if the hospital said again, "We don't know the cause, she needs to be examined at the state clinic"? Which meant going to Chicago, renting housing, paying for tests. Finally, the hands of the clock pointed to 8 sharp. Tansy changed in the storeroom, pulling on her old but clean jacket, and carefully knocked on the shift manager's office door. "Come in, Tansy, don't be shy," came an unfamiliar voice. The small office smelled of expensive cologne and cigars, though Michael didn't smoke. He had quit back in the late 90s after lung surgery. Behind his desk sat John Peterson, rolling a golden pen with an engraving in his fingers. He looked about 55, but he carried himself well. Fit, with the bearing of a soldier, like the officers who sometimes stopped by from the nearby military base. Michael himself was not in the office. "Tansy Wilson?" John Peterson looked at her with a scrutinizing gaze, as if appraising merchandise at an auction. "Sit down." She sat down on the edge of the chair, clutching a worn faux leather handbag she had bought back when her husband was still around. Before Sophia was born, before the first seizure. Before his escape into a new life without a sick child. The handle of the bag had long since frayed, and Tansy had sewn on a new one, found on clearance at a dollar store. She had done it herself, by hand, just as her grandmother once taught her. A woman should know how to sew, Tansy. No man will ever mend your rags for you. Your daughter is ill, isn't she? John Peterson asked suddenly, leaning back in his chair and fixing Tansy with a piercing stare. She tensed. How did he know? Had someone reported her for taking food from the gas station? Or for those 2 times Michael had let her leave early? Yes, Sophia. She has seizures. Tansy swallowed the lump in her throat. The doctors can't figure out the cause. Either epilepsy or something with the brain circulation. She's 8, correct? John Peterson went on, his tone giving no clue as to where he was heading. Yes, she turned 8 in April. John Peterson nodded, as if making some decision, and set the pen aside. I have a business proposition for you, Tansy. He paused, as if carefully choosing his words. My son Stanley. 5 years ago he was in an accident. He was coming back from a friend's birthday. A drunk driver crossed into his lane. His spine. Paralyzed from the waist down. Tansy nodded sympathetically, still not understanding what this had to do with her, or why he was telling her about his son's tragedy. He's 32. He was a promising engineer, John Peterson continued, and for the first time, pain seeped into his voice. Now he sits at home all day. Doesn't want to see anyone. Reads books, sometimes tinkers with electronics. but lives like a hermit. And he needs to. He paused again. Move on. Start a new life. Tansy waited silently, an inexplicable unease rising in her chest. He needs a wife, John Peterson said flatly, locking eyes with her. And you are the perfect candidate. Tansy choked on air and coughed. Excuse me, she managed when she could breathe again. It's simple. John Peterson leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. You marry my son, move into our house. In return, complete financial support for you and your daughter, including treatment at any clinic in the world. I have connections in Israel, in Germany. We can send your Sophia even to the Mayo Clinic in America. The room swam before her eyes. Tansy gripped her bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her ears roared, as if she were once again standing by the sea. On their last trip together with her husband, just a month before Sophia was born. You're asking me to sell myself, she whispered, feeling her face flush hot. John Peterson winced, as though at a toothache, and waved his hand dismissively, brushing her words aside. I'm offering you a deal that will help both you and my son. He pulled a photograph from his jacket pocket and laid it on the table. Here he is. Stanley. Before the accident. A handsome young man looked out from the photo, intelligent eyes and a faint smile. Dark, slightly wavy hair, a high forehead, a straight nose. He resembled his father, but his features were softer, kinder. He's a smart guy, John Peterson went on, slipping the photo back into his pocket. 2 university degrees. Fluent in English. But after the accident he shut down. Refuses to see anyone. Caregivers run away from him. That's what he's become. He needs a family. And your daughter needs treatment. But why me? Tansy nervously laced her fingers together. I'm just a cleaner. I only have a technical college behind me. A sick child. An ex-husband who barely pays child support. I've been observing you, John Peterson interrupted. Michael speaks highly of you. Says you're hardworking, honest. Never late. You know your job. You're a decent woman, diligent. And beautiful, he added matter-of-factly, as if stating a fact. Besides, you seem desperate. The last word struck like a slap. Yes, that was exactly her state. Didn't despair speak in the sleepless nights by her daughter's bedside, waiting for her to finally fall asleep after a seizure? Wasn't it despair that drove her to work every morning despite exhaustion and pounding headaches? Wasn't it despair that made her count every cent and darn old stockings instead of buying new ones? How much time do I have to think it over? Tansy asked, surprised at herself for not refusing outright. Until tomorrow. John Peterson handed her a thick cardboard business card with gold embossing. Call this number when you decide. My personal phone. Now go to the hospital to your daughter. I've arranged a taxi for you. It's already waiting at the entrance. Tansy stood on shaky legs. Fragments of thoughts spun in her head, accusations of selling herself mixing with hope for Sophia's salvation. And what about love? She wanted to scream. But was this about love now? No. It was about survival. By the way, John Peterson stopped her at the door. Stanley must not know about this arrangement. For him, it will be a real marriage. Do you understand? She nodded silently and stepped outside. A fine drizzle fell, making the gray industrial city look even bleaker. The neon sign of the gas station reflected in puddles, painting them red. There really was a taxi at the entrance. Not a regular cab with checkers, but a brand new foreign car. The driver, a young man in a leather jacket, opened the door for her with a friendly gesture. To the children's hospital, right? She nodded and slid into the back seat. The gold-embossed business card burned in her pocket, and in her head echoed the doctor's voice. Without proper treatment, the seizures will become more frequent. We cannot guarantee, do you understand, Tansy? Without specialized treatment, we cannot guarantee. Tansy understood. She understood all too well. Which was why, that night, sitting by Sophia's hospital bed as the girl slept, she pulled out her phone and dialed the number on the card. The line rang, then a familiar voice. "I'm listening." "John Peterson? This is Tansy from the gas station." "I agree." She had made her decision. After all, for her daughter's sake, she was ready for anything. Even to marry the paralyzed son of a millionaire. In the morning, Tansy was awakened by a phone call. The phone was ringing insistently on the nightstand beside the hospital bed where she had spent the night. Sophia was still asleep, her fair hair fanned across the pillow. Just like Tansy's had been in childhood. "Hello," she whispered, stepping into the corridor so as not to wake her daughter. "Good morning, Tansy," came John Peterson's voice on the line, just as businesslike as the day before. "I'm glad you made the right choice. A car will be at the hospital in an hour. We need to discuss the details." He hung up without waiting for a reply. Tansy leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. The doubts that had tormented her all night came rushing back with renewed force. Had she made the right decision? Was she selling her life, her body, her soul? But did she really have a choice? Head nurse Valentina Davis, a stout woman with tired eyes and kind hands, peeked into the ward. "What are you doing standing in the hallway, dear? How's your little girl?" "Asleep," Tansy replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Valentina, tell me, is there hope that Sophia can be cured?" The nurse sighed heavily. She had worked in the children's hospital for more than 30 years and had seen everything. "Tansy, if there's money, then there's always hope. You know how our healthcare is, everything runs on enthusiasm. The real specialists are either in New York or abroad. Ordinary people just don't have that kind of money. And if there was?" Tansy looked at her intently. "If there was money for the very best doctors? Well, then it's a different story," Valentina brightened. "They say in Israel they work miracles. And in Germany, the clinics are very good too. My neighbor took her grandson to Berlin, and they diagnosed him in a week, while our doctors struggled for 2 years. But where would you find that kind of money, my dear?" Tansy only gave a sad smile and went back into the ward. Sophia was already awake and now sat on the bed, shuffling through a stack of worn English flashcards, a gift from her teacher. "Mommy, look, I've already learned 10 new words," she exclaimed joyfully when she saw Tansy. "Miss Baker said I'm talented." "Of course you are." Tansy sat on the edge of the bed and hugged her daughter. "You're the smartest girl in the world." Sophia was a thin, pale little girl with enormous gray eyes. A fresh bruise from an4 stretched across her arm, and a hospital bracelet encircled her wrist. Yet even here, in the dreary state ward with faded curtains and peeling paint on the windowsill, she somehow managed to stay optimistic. "Mom, are they going to let us go home today?" she asked hopefully. "I want to go home. And to school. We're making crafts for the veterans, and I haven't finished mine." Tansy stroked her daughter's hair. How could she explain that soon they would have a new home? And a new life? "Sweetheart, we need to have a serious talk," she began carefully. "Remember how I told you about different families? That some have moms and dads, some only moms, like us. Or only dads, like Kevin in 3rd grade B," Sophia chimed in. "He has only a dad, no mom. She moved to California." "That's right. And sometimes a new dad appears. Or a new mom." Sophia frowned, thinking it over. Like Megan. She got a new dad when she was 6. Her real dad's in prison. Tansy sighed. How did children know everything? "Not exactly," she faltered, unsure how to explain. "The thing is, we might also soon have a dad. A new one." "You fell in love?" Sophia's eyes widened. "Like in the movies?" Tansy couldn't help but smile. Sophia adored old romantic films and could watch them endlessly, though she didn't always understand the plots. "No, not in love," she admitted honestly. "But this man is very good. And he is sick. He needs help." "Like me?" Sophia instantly grew serious. An adult expression beyond her years, far too familiar with hospitals and medications. Yes, only in a different way. He can't walk. But he's smart and kind. And he'll be my dad? Sophia pressed. And we'll all live together? Yes, darling. If you don't mind. Sophia thought for a moment, fiddling with the edge of her blanket. Will he love me? Not like that 1 inch she trailed off, but Tansy understood she meant her real father. I think he will. He'll love you, Tansy hugged her daughter. And he also has a father. A very wealthy man. He'll help us with your treatment. We'll go to a good clinic where you'll get better. Then I agree, Sophia nodded solemnly, as if it really depended on her. When are we going to him? Soon, Tansy checked the time. But right now we need to get ready. A car is coming for us. While Sophia washed up and brushed her teeth in the shared bathroom at the end of the hall, Tansy spoke with the attending doctor. A young intern, barely out of medical school, who did everything he could but always threw up his hands when it came to a diagnosis. We can discharge her, of course, he said, signing the papers. But you understand, Tansy, we're only treating the symptoms, not the cause. She needs a full examination in a good clinic. I know, she nodded. Now we have that chance. An hour later, just as John Peterson had promised, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up in front of the hospital. The same driver who had brought Tansy the day before stepped out. Good morning, he greeted Sophia with a warm smile. What a beautiful girl. What's your name? Sophia Wilson, she replied with dignity, extending her hand for a handshake, just as her grandmother had taught her. And yours? My name is David, the driver said seriously, shaking the little hand. Nice to meet you, Sophia. Please, get in the car. John Peterson is waiting for you. Sophia climbed onto the soft leather back seat with delight. Mom, look, there's a TV here. And a fridge, she clapped her hands. Just like in the movies. Tansy sat down beside her, still feeling out of place in the luxurious car. Inside it smelled of expensive leather and some woody fragrance. The driver started the engine, and the car moved smoothly off. Where are we going? Tansy asked, watching the dreary high-rises of their residential district slide past the window. To John Peterson's house, David answered. He wants to discuss everything in a calm setting. Don't worry, it's not far. Not far turned out to be a relative term. They drove for at least half an hour, first across the whole city, then along the new bypass road, and finally turned into a strip of forest where a cottage settlement began. A true oasis of luxury amid standard housing blocks. Wow, look at those houses. Sophia whistled, her nose pressed to the window. Just like in the movies, remember, Mom? The houses were indeed impressive. 3- and 4-story mansions, each with its own plot, fenced by tall walls. Wrought iron gates, marble statues, fountains. Everything screamed of the owner's wealth. At last, the car stopped at the largest house deep inside the settlement. It was built in a modern style, glass and concrete, but with classical elements. Columns at the entrance and stucco under the roof. We're here, David announced, getting out to open the door for them. Tansy stepped out, holding Sophia's hand. They climbed the wide marble steps to the entrance door, which opened before they even reached it. John Peterson stood on the threshold. In simple jeans and a shirt, yet still imposing and a little intimidating. Welcome, he nodded to Tansy, then crouched in front of Sophia. And you must be Sophia. I've heard a lot about you. From who? The girl asked directly, tilting her head. Were you spying on us? John Peterson laughed, warmly and genuinely, surprisingly. No, I wasn't spying. I just made inquiries. It's normal to learn about people you invite into your home. Are we going to live here now? Sophia was already curiously examining the huge hall with its crystal chandelier and marble floor. If you want to, John Peterson straightened. Come in, don't stand in the doorway. We have a lot to discuss. He led them through the hall into a spacious living room, tastefully furnished but without excessive pomp. Light walls, comfortable sofas, large windows overlooking a well-kept garden. "Sit down," John Peterson gestured to the sofa. "Tea, coffee?" "Tea, please," Tansy replied, still feeling uneasy. "Sophia, sit next to me." But the girl had already discovered the bookcase and was curiously examining the spines. "Do you have Harry Potter?" she asked, turning to the master of the house. "I'm afraid not," John Peterson shook his head. "But Stanley definitely has it in his room. He loves science fiction. You'll see it later." "And where is he?" Sophia glanced around, as if expecting her new dad to appear from around the corner at any moment. In his wing of the house, John Peterson poured tea into cups. "We live separately. He has his half, I have mine. You'll meet him soon, don't worry." He waited until Sophia settled down beside her mother, then spoke, addressing Tansy. "So, let's discuss the details. You agreed to marry my son. I am grateful to you for that. In return, I promise full support for you and your daughter, including treatment in the best clinics. In addition," he pulled a folder of documents from a desk drawer, "I will open an account in your name. $8,000 monthly for personal expenses. Is that sufficient?" Tansy nearly choked on her tea. $8,000. Her monthly salary multiplied by 20. "More than enough," she managed. "Good," John Peterson nodded. "Now about the wedding. I propose we hold it in a week. Quiet, modest, without unnecessary fuss. At the municipal office, followed by a small reception here, for the closest ones. Do you have relatives you'd like to invite?" Tansy shook her head. Her parents had long since passed away, and she had almost no contact with the rest of her family. "Only a friend, Lena. We studied together." "Excellent. On our side there will be a couple of my old friends. Stanley isn't very sociable, he has hardly any friends left after the accident." "What happened?" asked Sophia, who had been listening carefully while munching a cookie. "Why can't he walk?" John Peterson's face darkened. "An accident, girl. A terrible accident. A drunk driver swerved into his lane. Stanley was barely saved. His spine was damaged, his legs don't work. Though the doctors say there's still a chance." He fell silent, as if unwilling to continue in front of the child. "Mom also had an accident when she was pregnant with me," Sophia suddenly said. "That's why I have seizures." "That's what the doctor said." Tansy flinched. She had never told her daughter about it. "How did she know?" "Who told you that, sweetheart?" "The doctor in the corridor was talking to a nurse. I heard them. They thought I was asleep," Sophia shrugged. "Is it true? Is that why Dad left us?" A heavy silence fell over the room. Tansy didn't know what to say. It was true. In the 6th month of her pregnancy she had been in an accident. Not too serious, or so it had seemed at the time. But after Sophia was born, the problems began. At first rare convulsions, then more frequent seizures. And when the girl turned 3, her husband couldn't take it anymore and left. "I can't watch her suffer," he had said then. "And I can't watch you suffer." "Your father left because he is a weak man," John Peterson suddenly interjected, looking straight into the girl's eyes. "Real men don't abandon their family in trouble. Remember that, Sophia." Sophia nodded, taking in his words with all the seriousness of an 8-year-old child. "And your son? Is he a real man?" she asked. "My son," John Peterson hesitated for a moment. "My son is very strong in spirit. He didn't break, though many would have in his place. And I am certain he will never abandon those he cares about." Tansy looked at him in surprise. The stern businessman, used to commanding and demanding, suddenly spoke of his son with such unguarded tenderness and pride. "And now," John Peterson continued, finishing his tea, "let me show you the house. You should know where you'll be living. And then I'll introduce you to Stanley." Only please, he lowered his voice, leaning toward Tansy, don't tell him about our arrangement. For him, this must be a real marriage. He's proud. He would never agree to a woman marrying him out of pity or for money. I understand, Tansy answered quietly, but how do we explain why we suddenly decided to marry? We don't even know each other. Leave that to me, John Peterson smiled mysteriously. I have a plan. Sophia finished her tea and wiped her lips with a napkin, trying to do it like a lady. She had read somewhere that real ladies never lick their lips after eating. Can I see the garden? She asked. From the hospital window I only saw a little park, but here the trees are so beautiful. Of course you can, John Peterson rose. Come, I'll show you everything. The house, the garden. And then we'll decide which room you'll choose. Tansy stood up and straightened her old dress, suddenly acutely aware of how out of place it looked in such surroundings. Sophia grabbed her hand. Mom, we're going to be happy here, right? She whispered hopefully. I'll do my best to make sure we are, Tansy replied, squeezing the small hand tightly. At that moment a noise came from deeper in the house. Something seemed to have fallen, followed by a man's voice. Father! Are you home? John Peterson froze, then a strange mix of worry and determination appeared on his face. And here is Stanley, he said. Earlier than I planned, but maybe that's even better. Come, I'll introduce you. Panic surged in Tansy's throat. She was not at all ready for this meeting. What would she say to the man she was about to marry for money? How could she look him in the eyes? But it was too late to turn back. John Peterson was already heading toward the door leading to the other wing of the house, and Sophia tugged at Tansy's hand, burning with curiosity. Come on, Mom. I want to see our new dad. Stanley sat in a wheelchair in the spacious hall connecting the two parts of the house. It wasn't an ordinary hospital chair, but a modern one, with an electric drive and many functions. Beside him stood a young woman in a white coat. A caregiver, most likely. Father, have you seen my glasses? He stopped mid-sentence, noticing the strangers. Sorry, I didn't know we had guests. Tansy froze, studying her future husband. He resembled the photograph John Peterson had shown her, but was much paler, with sharp lines at his mouth and shadows under his eyes. His hair had grown out and was carelessly brushed back. He was simply dressed, gray sweatpants, a dark blue t-shirt. His hands, with long, musical fingers, rested on the chair's armrests. But what struck Tansy most were his eyes. Intelligent, attentive, with a hidden fire. Stanley, meet them. John Peterson placed a hand on his son's shoulder. This is Tansy and her daughter Sophia. They are our guests. Stanley shifted his gaze from his father to Tansy, then to Sophia. A flicker of suspicion crossed his eyes. Guests, he repeated. Since when do you invite strangers into the house, Father? They're not exactly strangers, John Peterson coughed. Tansy works at one of my gas stations. And her daughter has health problems. I decided to help. Sophia, unembarrassed, stepped closer to the wheelchair. Hello, she said, holding out her hand. My name is Sophia Wilson. I'm 8 years old. What's your name? Stanley looked at the small hand offered to him, and a shadow of a smile flickered across his face. Stanley Peterson, he replied, carefully shaking the girl's hand. Just stand to friends. I'm 32. And why are you in a chair? Sophia asked bluntly, ignoring her mother's warning glance. Because of the accident? Sophia. Tansy grabbed her daughter's shoulder. I'm sorry, she didn't mean. It's all right, Stanley raised a hand, stopping her apology. Yes, Sophia, because of the accident. 5 years ago some fool drunk at the wheel crossed into my lane. As a result, I can't walk. For now I can't, he added, with a stubborn edge to his voice. I was in an accident too, Sophia announced. When I was in Mommy's tummy. That's why I have seizures. But Mommy says we'll find good doctors and they'll cure me. Stanley looked closely at the girl, then shifted his gaze to Tansy, as if weighing her words. What kind of seizures? He asked. The doctors can't say for sure. Tansy clasped her fingers nervously. Either epilepsy or something else. The seizures come suddenly, usually after emotional or physical strain. Interesting, Stanley scratched his chin. I know a neurologist in New York. I could ask him to look at your medical records. Really? Tansy couldn't hide the hope in her voice. Stanley has an interest in medicine, John Peterson explained. After the accident he had to study a lot. Sometimes I think he knows more than some doctors. Stanley grimaced. Don't exaggerate, Father. I just have an interest. It helps not to lose my mind. He said the last words quietly, but Tansy heard them. And something in his tone made her heart tighten. She suddenly realized that in front of her was not just a disabled man, but someone who fought his fate every single day. Emily, Stanley turned to the caregiver, you can have the evening off. I'll manage on my own. The woman in the white coat nodded and quickly left. Stanley turned his chair and looked at his father. So why did you bring them here? He asked bluntly. Don't tell me it's charity. I know you too well. John Peterson looked a little thrown off. A rare expression for his usually confident face. Sophia, he said to the girl, would you like to see the garden? There's a beautiful pond with carp. You can feed them. I'd love to, the girl exclaimed. Can I, Mom? Tansy hesitated. She didn't want to leave her daughter with a stranger, even if it was John Peterson. But on the other hand, it was clear she needed to talk with Stanley alone. All right, but not for long, she agreed. And be careful by the water. I'll watch her, John Peterson assured, offering his hand to Sophia. Come, I'll show you where the biggest carp live. When they left, an awkward silence settled in the hall. Stanley studied Tansy openly, while she didn't know where to look. So, he finally said, let's be honest. What is my father really planning? Tansy flinched. How could she answer? What could she say? She had promised John Peterson not to reveal their arrangement. I don't know what you mean, she tried to deflect. Come on, Stanley smirked. My father never does anything without a reason. He brings a young woman with a child into the house, talks about some kind of treatment. Let me guess, he offered you money? For what? Tansy felt her face flush hot. Had he guessed? Or had John Peterson tried something like this before? She faltered, at a loss for words. I see, Stanley shook his head. He decided to find me a nanny. Or a caregiver. Emily is quitting, moving back to her family in Boston, and father is in a panic looking for a replacement. And he found you. A single mother who needs money for her child's treatment. He offered you a live-in job, right? Tansy let out a breath of relief. Thank God he hadn't guessed the truth. Something like that, she admitted cautiously. But I haven't given a final answer yet. We came to get acquainted. Stanley studied her intently, as if trying to read her thoughts. You do realize I'm not helpless, he said pointedly. I don't need a caregiver. I can take care of myself. At least most of the time. I never thought otherwise, Tansy replied sincerely. And I don't intend to treat you as helpless. Good, Stanley nodded. Then I ask one thing, be honest. If you decide to accept my father's offer, do it with your eyes open. I'm not the easiest person to deal with. Especially these last 5 years. He turned his chair and moved toward the wide window overlooking the garden. Tansy followed him. Through the glass she could see John Peterson and Sophia standing by the pond, feeding the fish with some special feed. She's a lovely girl, Stanley remarked, watching Sophia. Smart. And brave. Many children are afraid to come near the disabled. They think it's contagious, he chuckled, though without bitterness. Sophia is used to hospitals, Tansy explained. For her, a wheelchair isn't something frightening or strange. There was a boy in our ward who was missing a leg. They became friends. What do the doctors say about her condition? Stanley turned to Tansy. If you don't mind me asking. No secrets to hide, she sighed. They don't really say anything. At our local clinic they just shrug. At the city hospital they suspect epilepsy, but the tests don't match the classic picture. And a proper examination in New York or abroad, I just don't have the money. I understand. Stanley tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the armrest of his chair. Medicine in this country isn't the best. Especially if you don't have money or connections. Exactly, Tansy smiled faintly. That's why, when your father offered help, you grabbed at a straw, Stanley finished for her. I don't blame you. In your place, I'd do the same. He looked out the window again, where Sophia was animatedly telling John Peterson something, waving her hands. You know, Stanley said thoughtfully, I might be able to help. I really do have acquaintances among doctors, good specialists. And I know a bit about neurology. Not professionally, of course, but over the last 5 years I've had to study a lot. If you like, I could look over Sophia's medical records. Maybe I'll notice something the local doctors overlooked. Tansy looked at him in surprise and gratitude. You're really willing to help? Even though you don't know us? Why not? Stanley shrugged. I've got nothing else to do anyway. I sit within 4 walls all day, read, stare at the ceiling. This would at least be a bit of variety. His voice carried again that note which had touched Tansy earlier. A mixture of pain, bitterness, and unbending will. Thank you, she said softly. That's very human of you. Don't thank me too soon, Stanley turned away from the window. I promise nothing. I'll just try. And now, if you don't mind, I'd like to rest. I'm tired from the conversation. Not used to guests anymore. He spoke calmly, without resentment or irritation, simply stating a fact. Tansy nodded. Of course. Sophia and I should probably go too. We need to pack our things, if your father convinces us to move. He'll convince you, Stanley smirked. If he's set on something, he always gets his way. That's the kind of man he is. He extended his hand in farewell, and Tansy carefully shook it. Stanley's palm was warm and dry, with calluses on the pads of his fingers. Strange for someone confined to a wheelchair. See you, Tansy, he said. I think we'll meet again. Goodbye, she released his hand. And thank you for offering to help. I'll bring Sophia's documents. When? If we move. Stanley nodded and turned his chair, heading deeper into the house. Tansy watched him go, noting how confidently he maneuvered the chair, how straight he held his back. Proud. Strong. Nothing like what she had imagined. Soon John Peterson and Sophia returned. Both were cheerful, eyes sparkling. Mom, the fish are huge. Sophia exclaimed excitedly. They make this yum-yum with their mouths and grab the food right from your hand. And John Peterson showed me a gazebo with swings. We can play there when we move. If we move, Tansy corrected her. We haven't decided yet. Oh, Mom, Sophia pouted. It's so wonderful here. And Stan seems kind. Did you meet him? He's going to be my new dad? Tansy looked helplessly at John Peterson, who came to the rescue. Sophia, don't rush things. Adults need to talk it through. If your mother agrees to work in our house, then you'll move here. And then we'll see how things go with Stanley. All right? Sophia nodded seriously, accepting the explanation. John Peterson turned to Tansy. You met my son? What did you think? He's not what I expected, Tansy admitted honestly. I thought he would be more broken. Stanley is strong, John Peterson said with pride. He's always been that way. I remember when he fell off his bike as a kid and broke his arm. He didn't even cry. Just said, Dad, I think I broke a bone. And walked himself to the car. His voice carried such love and pride that Tansy involuntarily smiled. Despite all his businesslike qualities, his toughness, and even ruthlessness in business, which people whispered about, John Peterson was, above all, a father who adored his son. He offered to help with Sophia's treatment, Tansy said. To look over the documents, reach out to some doctors in New York. You see? John Peterson beamed. I told you he's a good man. Just withdrawn. He needs more interaction, new people in the house. Then he'll be the way he used to be. Tansy wasn't sure about that. The man she had just met didn't seem like someone in need of help or pity. Rather, he wanted to help others himself. Perhaps to feel needed. So then, John Peterson rubbed his hands together. I think we can consider that you've agreed to move in with us. Tansy looked at Sophia, who was waiting hopefully for her answer. Then she remembered Stanley's pale face, his intelligent eyes, his offer to help. And finally, she thought of the $8,000 a month in treatment in the best clinics in the world. Yes, she said firmly. We'll move. But first I need to pack our things and quit my job. That won't be a problem, John Peterson assured her. I'll take care of everything. David will drive you home, help with the packing. And tomorrow evening I'll expect you here. Agreed? Tansy nodded, still hardly believing she had decided on such a step. Sophia clapped her hands joyfully. Hooray! We'll have a new home. And a new dad. John Peterson and Tansy exchanged glances. Both understood it wasn't that simple. But neither of them tried to dissuade the child. Let her be happy for now. Reality would come soon enough. Packing took less time than Tansy expected. She and Sophia had little. Clothes, books, a few toys, an old laptop left from her husband, family photos. It all fit into 3 large bags and 2 smaller ones. The apartment, a one-room on the 5th floor, no elevator, Tansy decided not to sell for now. Who knew how things would turn out in the new house? Besides, it was the only property she had. A tiny island of stability in a world that constantly shifted. With peeling paint on the ceiling and an eternally buzzing fridge, but still her own. Processing her resignation was the easiest part. Michael, the shift manager, only nodded knowingly when Tansy explained the situation. Apparently, John Peterson had already given him notice. Good luck to you, Tansy, he said, shaking her hand in farewell. You're a good worker. If anything, your spot will be here for you. For 3 months at least. When Nancy Williams heard the news, she threw up her hands. Lord, Tansy, it's like a fairy tale. Cinderella and the prince. Only the prince is in a wheelchair, and Cinderella has a daughter. But what does it matter? The important thing is, you'll be living in a rich house, and your girl will get her treatment. It's not a marriage, Tansy tried to explain. Just a live-in job. Nancy Williams snorted skeptically. Like I'd believe that. A young man, single, even if he's disabled. A beautiful woman nearby. Living in the same house. What do you think is going to come of that? Oh, don't say that, Tansy blushed. He's rich, educated. And me? Just a cleaner with a tech school diploma. Ah, silly girl, Nancy Williams shook her head. Men, whether rich or poor, all want the same thing. And for a lonely one, tied to a chair, doubly so. You'll see, not even a month will pass before he starts courting you. Nancy. Tansy was thoroughly embarrassed. Come on now, the cashier waved her hand. I mean it kindly. I'm happy for you, really. You've earned happiness after all you've been through. Come on, give me a goodbye hug. They embraced, and Tansy felt tears well in her eyes. They had worked together for 5 years, after all. In some sense, Nancy Williams had become almost like family. Always willing to listen, to support, to cover a shift if Tansy had to rush Sophia to the hospital. Call me, Nancy Williams said firmly, wiping her tears. And come visit. Tell me how life is in those rich mansions. Tansy promised, though she knew their friendship was unlikely to continue. Their lives would be far too different now. The last person she said goodbye to was her neighbor across the landing. Maria Davis, a retired physics teacher. She was the one who often looked after Sophia when Tansy worked the late shift. Oh, Tansy, I'm so happy for you, the old woman exclaimed, clapping her hands when she heard the news. It's high time your Sophia got proper treatment. That poor girl has suffered long enough. And you? What do you think? Tansy looked at her neighbor searchingly. You understand this isn't exactly a normal arrangement? What in life is normal? The old woman answered philosophically. I remember when I married my Jack, he had come back from the war without a leg. My parents tried to talk me out of it. Why would you marry a cripple? We raised 2 children. Lived together for 40 years. So don't look at the injury, Tansy. Look at the soul of the man. Tansy didn't bother to explain that this wasn't about marriage yet. Let her think what she wanted. Soon enough, the whole building would be buzzing with rumors. Of course, news like this. The next day, when a black SUV pulled up to the entrance, curious faces appeared at the windows. Just as John Peterson had promised, David the driver helped load their belongings, and soon she and Sophia were on their way to a new life. Mom, will I have my own room? Sophia asked, clutching a worn plush bear to her chest. The only toy she still refused to part with, despite being nearly 9. I think so, Tansy answered, stroking her daughter's head. The house is big, there's room for everyone. And will Stan read me stories? Like Dad used to? Tansy sighed. Sophia barely remembered her father. She had been 3 when he left. But sometimes she still longed for a man's presence in the house, for a father's attention and care. I don't know, sweetheart. Let's get to know him first, and then we'll see who reads stories to whom. David, overhearing their conversation, smiled. Stanley loves reading, he said, glancing at them in the rearview mirror. Before the accident, he was an avid bookworm. He's got a whole library at home. I think he'll be glad to read to such a smart girl. Tansy looked at the driver in surprise. You know him well? Since childhood, David nodded. I've been working for John Peterson for 15 years. Stanley was still in school back then. Good kid. Smart, kind. Only after the accident he closed in on himself. A shame. He's young, life ahead of him. And yet he shut himself away in a shell. And there's no one? Tansy asked cautiously. A girlfriend, friends? He had friends, but most drifted away. You know how it is. When you're healthy and cheerful, everyone's around. But when trouble comes, friends vanish. Only a few remain, and even they seldom visit. And a girlfriend? David's face darkened. There was one. They even talked of marriage. But when the accident happened, she vanished quickly. Couldn't handle it, you see. Moved to Chicago, got married. After that, Stanley closed himself off even more. Tansy nodded. A typical story, all too familiar. People fear someone else's pain, someone else's problems. It's easier to leave than to support. Her own husband had left for exactly the same reason. They pulled up to the house, and David, after unloading their belongings, led them inside. The house seemed even larger and more luxurious than it had the day before. In the hall, they were met by an older woman in a simple but neat dress. The housekeeper, Tansy assumed. Hello, I'm Anna Davis, she introduced herself. John Peterson asked me to show you your rooms. He's at an important meeting right now, he'll be back for dinner. And Stan? Sophia asked, glancing around. Is he home? Stanley is in his quarters, the housekeeper answered with a slight smile. He's in a physiotherapy session. Afterwards he usually rests. Anna Davis led them up the wide staircase to the second floor, into what she called the guest wing of the house. These will be your rooms. She opened the door to a spacious, bright bedroom with a huge bed and panoramic windows looking out onto the garden. This is for you, Tansy. And for Sophia, the room next door. With a squeal of delight, Sophia ran into the neighboring room, decorated in soft pink tones, with a canopy bed, a desk, and bookshelves. Mom! It's like a princess's room, she shouted. Look, there's even a dollhouse. Tansy stood stunned, taking in the rooms. Everything had been thought through to the smallest detail. As if they hadn't been expected just for a day, but for at least a week. In the wardrobe of Sophia's room hung new dresses in her size, on the shelves stood age-appropriate books, and on the nightstand sat a brand-new glucometer. Sophia had to check her blood sugar regularly because of the medication she was taking. John Peterson prepared everything, Anna Davis explained, noticing Tansy's surprise. He approaches every matter very thoroughly. But how did he know Sophia's sizes? And about the glucometer? He has his sources, the housekeeper replied evasively. Well, settle in. Dinner is at 7 o'clock. If you need anything, press the call button. Right there, by the door. She left, and Tansy was overcome by mixed feelings. On the one hand, such care and attention to detail were touching. On the other, it was unsettling. Who knew what else John Peterson had learned about them through his sources? Sophia, oblivious to her mother's doubts, was joyfully exploring the new space. She had already tried on one of the dresses, a blue one embroidered with flowers, and now twirled before the mirror, reveling in the rustle of the full skirt. Mom, I'm like Cinderella at the ball, she laughed. Only missing the glass slippers. Tansy smiled, watching her daughter's happy face. It had been so long since she had seen her so animated, so normal. Without the shadow of fear of another seizure, without that hidden sadness that appeared whenever Sophia compared herself to other children. Perhaps this alone made John Peterson's strange proposal worth accepting, for the sake of her daughter's happy smile. After unpacking their things, they decided to look around the house. Sophia, still wearing her new dress, led the way, peeking curiously into every open door. The house was enormous. 2 floors and an attic, not counting the basement, where a swimming pool and gym were located. On the first floor were the living room, dining room, John Peterson's library and office, and a recreation room with a giant TV and a billiard table. The second floor was residential, bedrooms, children's rooms, guest rooms. And in the attic, as a maid they met explained, were the staff quarters. And where does Stan live? Sophia asked the young maid. In the east wing, she replied. He has a whole apartment there, with special adaptations. Ramps, wide doorways, a special bathroom. Everything for convenience. Can we visit him? Sophia. Tansy scolded her. Don't pester people with questions. Actually, you can, the maid smiled. Stanley doesn't mind visitors. It's just that hardly anyone ever comes, so he's gotten used to being alone. If you like, I can take you. We'd love to. Sophia agreed immediately, grabbing Tansy's hand. Come on, Mom. Let's show Stan my new dress. Tansy hesitated. On the one hand, it would be impolite to intrude on someone without an invitation. On the other, Stanley himself had offered to help with Sophia's treatment. Perhaps this was a chance to talk about it. All right, she decided. But only for a little while. If Stanley's busy, we'll leave right away. The maid led them through the hall to the east wing of the house. Everything there truly was adapted for a person in a wheelchair, wide corridors, no thresholds, special handrails along the walls. Stanley, you have visitors, the maid called, knocking on a door at the end of the corridor. Come in, came Stanley's voice. The maid opened the door and left, while Tansy and Sophia stepped into a spacious, sunlit room. It was not a bedroom, as Tansy had expected, but something like a study. Bookcases lined the walls, crammed to capacity. In the center stood a large desk with a computer. By the window was a strange contraption, something like exercise equipment. Stanley sat in his wheelchair at the desk, typing on a laptop. Seeing them, he closed the lid and turned toward them. Good afternoon, he greeted. I see you've settled in already? Yes, we like everything very much, Tansy replied. Sorry if we came at a bad time. You came at just the right time, Stanley smiled. I was just finishing. Sophia, what a beautiful dress. That color suits you perfectly. Sophia beamed at the compliment and made a small curtsy, as her dance teacher had taught her at school. Thank you. It's a gift from your father. I've got a whole wardrobe of them in my room. Father always loved giving gifts. Stanley turned his gaze to Tansy. How do you like the new home? To be honest, I'm a little overwhelmed, she admitted. Such luxury. And so much attention to detail. How did your father even know about the glucometer for Sophia? Stanley shrugged. He has his ways. Not always legal, but effective. He probably made inquiries at the hospital. He's got people everywhere. Tansy frowned. The thought unsettled her. What else might John Peterson know about her and Sophia? Don't worry, Stanley seemed to read her thoughts. Father won't misuse that information. He just wanted to make sure you'd be comfortable in our home. Meanwhile, Sophia was curiously examining the strange contraption by the window. And what's this? She asked, pointing at it. Some kind of exercise machine? Stanley and Tansy both turned toward the window. Tansy saw metal bars fixed parallel to each other, like the ones in a gym used for exercises on the bars. Yes, it's exercise equipment, Stanley replied after a pause. For the arms. To keep the muscles from atrophying. But Tansy felt he wasn't telling the whole truth. Something was off about this so-called arm trainer. The bars were set too low, with too many special fastenings. Can I try it too? Sophia asked, reaching toward the bars. No. Stanley said sharply, and Sophia quickly pulled her hand back. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. It's just a special machine, calibrated for me. It could be dangerous for children. Sophia nodded, accepting the explanation. But Tansy noticed how tense Stanley had become when the girl approached the machine. Something wasn't right here. Speaking of health, Stanley changed the subject. Did you bring Sophia's medical records? I'd like to take a look. Yes, of course, Tansy pulled a folder from her bag. Everything we have is here. Hospital reports, test results, doctor's notes. Most of them aren't very informative, though. Stanley took the folder and began going through the documents. His expression grew increasingly focused. Interesting, he murmured. The symptoms resemble epilepsy, but the EEG doesn't show the classic pattern of epileptic seizures. And did she have an MRI? Only once, 2 years ago, Tansy answered. In the city hospital. They said there were no visible structural changes in the brain. Any history of head trauma? Stanley continued studying the documents. Besides that car accident during pregnancy? No, only the accident. But the doctor said it wasn't serious. Just sudden braking. I didn't even hit my belly. There still could have been a concussion, Stanley said thoughtfully. And with sudden braking there's the possibility of a hydrodynamic shock, which could have affected the fetus. But these are all just theories. She needs a more detailed examination. He set the documents aside and looked at Sophia, who had already lost interest in the conversation and was browsing the books on the shelves. Sophia, do you like reading? He asked. Yes, the girl brightened. Especially about princesses and wizards. And about animals. I've got a wonderful book about a magical land where talking animals live, Stanley pointed to one of the shelves. Third shelf from the bottom, green cover with a golden lion. Do you see it? Sophia walked over to the shelf and pulled out the book. The Chronicles of Narnia, she read the title. I saw this one in the school library, but it's always checked out. You can take this one, Stanley offered. Just be careful with it, all right? It's my favorite book from childhood. Sophia hugged the book to her chest and nodded solemnly. I'll be very, very careful. I promise. While they talked, Tansy quietly looked around the room. On Stanley's desk she noticed a stack of medical journals, and beside them several books with titles like Modern Neurology and Diagnosis of Epilepsy and Epileptiform Conditions. He really did seem to be studying medicine seriously. You know, Stanley said suddenly, noticing her glance, I think Sophia may not have classic epilepsy, but some rarer condition. Possibly related to that accident. I need to consult with specialists. I have a friend in New York, Professor Blackmore, one of the best neurologists in the country. I could contact him, describe the symptoms, send over the documents. Do you really think he could help? Tansy asked hopefully. I don't know, Stanley answered honestly. But it's worth trying. In the end, what do we have to lose? At that moment there was a knock on the door, and Anna Davis peeked in. Stanley, it's time for your therapy. The masseur is waiting. Thank you, Anna, Stanley nodded. I'll be right there. The housekeeper nodded and left. Stanley turned to Tansy and Sophia. Excuse me, I have to go. Therapy is sacred. But we'll talk more about Sophia's treatment, all right? Of course, Tansy stood up. Thank you so much for your help. And for the book. You're welcome, Stanley smiled. I'm glad you moved in. It's been a long time since there was life in this house. He turned his chair toward the door, then suddenly stopped and looked back. By the way, did Father mention any plans for the near future? Any events, meetings? No, Tansy shook her head. Only about dinner tonight. I see, Stanley nodded. Well then, I'll see you at dinner. And be ready for surprises. My father loves them. With those cryptic words he wheeled out of the room, leaving Tansy puzzled. What kind of surprises? And why did she have the feeling Stanley knew far more about his father's plans than he let on? They returned to their rooms, and Sophia immediately curled up on the bed with her new book. Tansy sat beside her, watching as her daughter eagerly read the first pages of the Chronicles of Narnia. What do you think of Stan? She asked carefully. What's your impression of him? Sophia lifted her eyes from the book and thought for a moment. He's good, she said with certainty. Kind. And smart. You know, Mom, he's nothing like Uncle Brad. Uncle Brad, that was what Sophia had called her father in recent years, refusing to call him Dad. How so? Tansy asked. Well, Uncle Brad always said he was busy when I asked him to read to me. But Stan offered me a book himself. And he doesn't pretend he's interested in talking to me. He really is interested. Tansy looked at her daughter in surprise. When had she become so perceptive? At only 8 years old, Sophia sometimes showed a startling wisdom and attentiveness. And also, the girl added, he's like a knight from a fairy tale. A knight? Tansy repeated. Why? Because he's fighting, Sophia answered simply. Fighting his illness. Like a real knight fighting a dragon. He doesn't give up. Tansy hugged her daughter, moved by her words. Sometimes children see what adults fail to notice, blinded by prejudice and stereotypes. You're right, sweetheart, she said. He really doesn't give up. And you don't give up either, all right? All right, Mommy, Sophia smiled and returned to her reading. Tansy walked to the window, looking out over the well-kept garden below. Rose bushes, neatly trimmed lawns, a fountain with marble statues. Like something out of a fairy tale. Only fairy tales usually ended with a prince and princess's wedding. What awaited her and Sophia in this luxurious house? And what had Stanley meant when he spoke of his father's surprises? For dinner, Tansy put on the only decent dress she owned. Blue, with long sleeves, bought at a clearance sale 2 years ago. Sophia stayed in her gifted blue dress, only tying a white ribbon in her hair. We're like princesses, aren't we, Mom? She asked, twirling before the mirror. Of course, Tansy smiled, though she felt more like Cinderella at someone else's ball. Anna Davis led them to the dining room, a vast space with a long oak table and a crystal chandelier. The table was set for 4, with a snow-white tablecloth, silver cutlery, and crystal glasses. Wow! Sophia whispered. Just like in a movie about kings. John Peterson was already waiting for them, dressed in a strict dark blue suit. Beside him, in a wheelchair, sat Stanley in a white shirt and dark trousers. Good evening, ladies, John Peterson bowed gallantly. You look wonderful. Thank you, Tansy said, tugging nervously at her dress. Sitting across from these impeccably dressed men, she felt out of place. Please, sit down, John Peterson gestured to the chairs. Dinner will be served shortly. They sat at the table, Tansy and Sophia on one side, John Peterson and Stanley on the other. Anna Davis appeared with a tray, setting plates of salad before them. So, John Peterson began once everyone had their first course. How do you like our home? Do you feel comfortable here? Very much. Sophia answered immediately. My room is so beautiful. And I got new books. Stan lent me Narnia. Really? John Peterson looked at his son in surprise. That's your favorite book? It's fine, Stanley shrugged. I've got several editions. We're very grateful for the hospitality, Tansy said. Everything is just wonderful. I'm glad to hear it, John Peterson nodded. Because I have a surprise for you. Stanley gave his father a sharp look but said nothing. What kind of surprise? Sophia asked, putting down her fork. I arranged a consultation for you, Sophia, John Peterson smiled. On Monday, Professor Blackmore from New York will come here. He's the best pediatric neurologist in the country. Tansy stared at Stanley in astonishment. He sat with an impassive face, but in his eyes flickered something like surprise. The same Blackmore you mentioned? She asked Stanley. Yes, he nodded. But I haven't even contacted him yet. I called myself, John Peterson explained. Stanley often spoke of him. So I decided not to waste time. Alexander will arrive Monday morning and stay the whole day. He'll examine Sophia, review the documents, and give recommendations. But that must be incredibly expensive, Tansy murmured. Don't worry about the money, John Peterson waved it off. We have an agreement. Tansy didn't know what to say. Could it really be that simple? One phone call, and the country's top specialist would fly to their home? For ordinary people, it sounded like a fairy tale. And what other surprises? Sophia asked, clearly hoping for something more exciting for an 8-year-old. John Peterson smiled slyly. How about this, after the consultation, we all go on vacation together? Somewhere by the sea? The sea? Sophia jumped in her seat. A real one? With sand and waves? The real thing, John Peterson nodded. Florida. I have a house there, right on the shore. Private beach, swimming pool, a garden with fruit trees. Hooray! Sophia clapped her hands. Mom, we'll go, right? I've never been to the sea. Tansy looked helplessly at John Peterson, then at Stanley. He sat with an impassive face, studying the food on his plate. I don't know, she began. It's a very generous offer, but... No buts, John Peterson said firmly. Sophia needs fresh air, swimming in the sea. It's good for her health. Besides, he lowered his voice, after Professor's consultation she may need time to adjust to new treatment. Better to do that in peace, away from the city. Logical. But Tansy felt there was more behind this offer. The look Stanley gave his father only deepened her suspicion. And will Stan come too? Sophia asked, gazing at the young man with hope. Of course, John Peterson answered for his son. We'll all go together. As a family. At the word family, Tansy flinched. So that was it. John Peterson was clearly rushing things, trying to create the appearance of family ties. But why? To convince Stanley? Or was there another reason? And one more surprise, John Peterson continued, tomorrow we're going shopping. Tansy, you need new clothes. And Sophia too. Especially for a seaside holiday. But I have clothes, Tansy protested. And you've already bought so much for Sophia. It's not enough, John Peterson cut her off. You need a full wardrobe. Dresses, suits, shoes. Only the best. Tansy looked helplessly at Stanley, hoping for support. At last he lifted his eyes from his plate. Father, I think you're rushing things, he said calmly. Tansy and Sophia just moved in today. Give them time to settle. Time? John Peterson frowned. We don't have time, Stanley. I'm not getting any younger. And Yui broke off, casting a glance at Sophia. In short, we must act quickly. What do you mean, quickly? Stanley narrowed his eyes. What are you planning, father? Tension filled the dining room. Tansy didn't understand what was happening, but she felt there was some hidden struggle between father and son. All right, John Peterson exhaled deeply. I wanted to wait for a more suitable moment, but it seems I'll have to say it now. Stanley, I didn't invite Tansy and Sophia into our home for no reason. I already figured that out, Stanley answered dryly. You decided to find me a nurse. Or a companion. Or someone to make sure I take my medicine and do my exercises. No, John Peterson shook his head. I want Tansy to become your wife. Stanley froze, his fork suspended midair. Sophia's eyes widened in astonishment, and Tansy felt her cheeks flush hot. What? Stanley managed. Say that again. You heard me, John Peterson remained perfectly calm. I want you two to marry. And the sooner, the better. But why? Stanley looked at his father in disbelief, then at Tansy. We hardly know each other. That doesn't matter, John Peterson set down his cutlery. The important thing is that Tansy is a decent woman, a good mother. And Sophia? He looked fondly at the girl. Sophia will be a wonderful daughter for you. Father, are you insane? Stanley shook his head. You can't just marry me off to the first woman who comes along. I'm not the first woman who comes along, Tansy said suddenly, surprising even herself. And I have already agreed. Stanley looked at her as if she had just confessed to murder. What? His gaze darted from Tansy to his father. You've decided everything already? Behind my back? Stanley, try to understand, John Peterson leaned toward his son. I'm doing this for your own good. You need a family. A wife, a child. A normal life, not endless seclusion within four walls. And what does she get? Stanley nodded toward Tansy. Besides a crippled husband and a tyrant father-in-law? Treatment for her daughter, John Peterson answered simply. A roof over her head. Financial stability. Security for the future. Stanley stared at Tansy with a long, probing look. In his eyes she read a mix of emotions, distrust, hurt, disappointment. So that's what this is, he said at last. A marriage of convenience. Very practical. The last word he uttered with such bitterness that Tansy felt sick at heart. Stanley, listen, she tried to explain. I never wanted. I don't need explanations, he cut her off. I understand everything. You have a deal. Father gets what he wants, a daughter-in-law and a granddaughter. You get money and treatment for your child. And me? What do I get? A chance at a normal life, John Peterson said firmly. A family to take care of you when I'm gone. I can take care of myself. Stanley slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses ring. I'm not helpless. Of course not, John Peterson sighed. But you're alone. And you'll be even lonelier when I die. Who will look after you then? I don't need looking after, Stanley repeated stubbornly. And I certainly don't need a woman who marries me out of pity or for money. He turned his wheelchair and headed toward the door. Stanley, come back. John Peterson rose. We're not finished. But Stanley had already wheeled out, without a backward glance. A heavy silence hung in the dining room. Sophia looked uncertainly from her mother to John Peterson. I'm sorry, Tansy said quietly. I didn't think you would tell him so directly. How else was I supposed to say it? John Peterson sank into his chair wearily. Stanley is stubborn. If you don't speak plainly, he'll pretend nothing is happening. But now he's angry, Tansy pointed out. At you and at me. It will pass, John Peterson waved it off. He'll realize I'm right. He always has. He was silent for a moment, then added. I'm dying, Tansy. She stared at him in shock. What? Cancer. Late stage. The doctors give me a year at most. John Peterson spoke calmly, as if discussing the weather. Stanley doesn't know. And he mustn't. Not yet. My God, Tansy didn't know what to say. I'm so sorry. No need, John Peterson gave a faint smile. I've lived a good life. Built a business, made a fortune. But the most important thing, my son. I need to know he'll be taken care of when I'm gone. And you chose me? Tansy shook her head. Why? I've been watching you, John Peterson repeated the words from their first meeting. You're strong, decent, and desperate. People like that value what they're given. And they keep their word. Sophia, who had been silently listening to the adults all this time, suddenly stood and walked over to John Peterson. Are you really dying? She asked bluntly. Sophia. Tansy scolded. You can't ask that. Why not? The girl asked in surprise. It's the truth. It's all right, John Peterson looked at Sophia with unexpected warmth. Yes, Sophia, I really am sick. And soon I'll be gone. That's why I want to make sure my son isn't left alone. Why don't you tell him? Sophia asked. He should know. Because Stanley loves me too much, John Peterson explained. If he finds out I'm dying, it will break him. He's already endured too much loss. Tansy looked at this stern, domineering man and saw how, behind the mask of a successful businessman, there was simply a father, desperately afraid for his child. I'll talk to him, she said suddenly. I'll explain everything. Without details about your illness. You think he'll listen? John Peterson asked skeptically. I don't know, Tansy admitted honestly. But it's worth a try. After all, she gave a bitter smile, I have nothing to lose. He already thinks I'm after money. She rose from the table. Sophia, finish your dinner. I'll be back soon. Where are you going, Mama? The girl asked. To talk to Stan. You're right, sweetheart. People need to be told the truth. Leaving the dining room, Tansy headed toward the east wing of the house. She had no idea what she would say to Stanley. But she knew one thing, this couldn't go on. Either they cleared the air now, or this entire family arrangement was doomed to fail. At Stanley's bedroom door she hesitated, gathering her thoughts, then knocked firmly. Who is it? Came a tense voice from inside. It's Tansy. We need to talk. Come in, Stanley answered after a pause. Tansy entered the room. Unlike the study they had been in earlier, this was a bedroom. Spacious, with a large bed specially adapted for a disabled person. Stanley sat by the window, staring out into the darkness of the garden. If you came to apologize, don't bother, he said without turning. I understand everything. I came to explain. Tansy moved closer. You have the right to know the truth. The truth? Stanley gave a bitter laugh. What truth? That my father bought me a wife? That you agreed to this charade for money? I already figured that out. Not just for money, Tansy said softly. For Sophia. For her health. Possibly her life. At last Stanley turned to her. I don't condemn you, Tansy. In your place, many would have done the same. But do you really think I'll agree to marry a woman who only accepts me because of my father's money? And wouldn't you do anything for someone you love? Tansy asked. For their health and happiness? Stanley was silent for a moment, then nodded. Perhaps you're right. But that doesn't change the essence. My father had no right to decide for me. Or for you. He's worried about you. Tansy sat down on the edge of the bed. He's afraid you'll be left alone. I'm not a child. Irritation rang in Stanley's voice. I'm 32 years old. Yes, I'm in a wheelchair. Yes, things are harder for me than for most people. But I'm not helpless. I know, Tansy replied calmly. And I've never thought of you as helpless. On the contrary, you are remarkably strong. And independent. Stanley looked at her intently, as if trying to determine whether she was sincere. "Thank you," he finally said, "but that doesn't solve our problems. Father won't back down. He never does." I noticed. Tansy gave a faint smile. "He told me a lot about himself. About you." "And what did he say?" Stanley raised an eyebrow. Tansy hesitated. She couldn't tell him about John Peterson's illness, but she didn't want to lie either. "That he loves you more than anything in the world," she finally answered. "And that he's ready to do anything to secure your future. Even buy me a wife." Stanley shook his head. "Such care." "Don't be angry with him," Tansy pleaded. "He's doing what he thinks is right. In his own way." "You know what hurts the most?" Stanley suddenly asked. "That he never even considered you. What it would be like for you to live with someone like me. To marry without love, out of pity or for money." "I thought about that too," Tansy admitted. "When he made me the proposal. Or rather, offered me this deal. I was shocked." But then she faltered. "Then what?" Stanley watched her closely. "Then I met you," she said softly. "And I realized it's not that simple. You're not someone to be pitied. And marrying you isn't such a sacrifice." Stanley looked at her skeptically. "Are you serious? Or just trying to sweeten a bitter pill?" "Quite serious," Tansy met his gaze. "You're intelligent, educated, interesting. With a sense of humor. And you've connected with Sophia. Believe me, that's worth a lot. And this doesn't bother you?" Stanley gestured toward his legs. "The fact that I'll never be able to," he didn't finish, but Tansy understood. "What bothers me more is your attitude," she replied honestly. "That you assume from the start that I'm mercenary and calculating." Stanley looked surprised. "I didn't," he broke off. "Sorry." "You're right. I shouldn't have made those assumptions." They fell silent. Outside, leaves rustled. Somewhere in the distance came the hum of cars. "What are we going to do?" Stanley finally asked. "Father won't give up, that's certain." "What if," Tansy looked at him uncertainly. "What if we pretend to agree? Stall for time? Maybe your father will reconsider." "He won't," Stanley answered firmly. "But a temporary truce might work. Only there's one problem." "What problem?" "Sophia," Stanley nodded toward the door. "She believes it's real. That I'll be her new dad." Tansy sighed. That truly was a problem. Sophia grew attached to people so easily, so desperately needed a father figure. To disappoint her would be cruel. "Maybe we shouldn't tell her?" Tansy suggested. "Let her think everything is moving along. And we'll just buy time." "And how long do you think we can keep that up?" Stanley asked skeptically. "Sooner or later Father will demand concrete action. A wedding, for example." "You know," Tansy stood firmly. "Let's deal with problems as they come. Right now the main thing is Sophia's treatment. On Monday the professor is coming. Let's focus on that. And then we'll see." Stanley studied her, then nodded. "All right. Sophia's health first. That's the most important thing. And I'll talk to Father. Try to explain that we need time." "Thank you," Tansy breathed out with relief. "And I'm sorry again for all of this. I never wanted to put you in such a position." "I know," Stanley gave a faint smile. "You're just a mother trying to save her daughter. There's nothing wrong in that." He held out his hand, and after a pause, Tansy took it. His palm was warm and firm. "Till tomorrow?" she asked. "Till tomorrow," he nodded. "Tansy?" "Yes?" "Thank you for coming to talk. It's honest." She smiled and left the room. In the hallway, Tansy leaned against the wall, catching her breath. Strangely, after talking with Stanley she felt lighter. As if the weight pressing on her shoulders since John Peterson's proposal had lifted a little. When she returned to the dining room, John Peterson was gone, and Sophia sat alone finishing dessert, ice cream with chocolate chips. "Where's John Peterson?" Tansy asked, sitting down beside her daughter. "He got a call and left," Sophia answered, licking her spoon. "He said he had something important." "And did you talk to Stan?" "Yes," Tansy stroked her daughter's hair. "Everything's fine. We came to an agreement." "About what?" Sophia lifted a curious gaze to her mother. "About the wedding?" "Not exactly," Tansy answered carefully. "We decided that first we need to take care of your health, and only then think about a wedding." "So there will be a wedding after all?" Sophia pressed. "Maybe," Tansy replied evasively. "But not right away. Stan and I need to get to know each other better. Do you understand?" Sophia tilted her head thoughtfully. "Not really. In movies, princes and princesses fall in love at first sight. And you and Stan have already seen each other twice." Tansy couldn't help but smile. Children's logic was relentless. "In real life things are more complicated than in movies, sweetheart. Grown-ups need more time to understand their feelings." "And what do you feel for Stan?" Sophia looked at her mother intently. "Do you like him?" Tansy hesitated. What did she feel for Stanley? Sympathy? Respect? Interest? "He's a good man," she finally replied. "Smart, kind. I feel calm with him." "That's not an answer," Sophia shook her head. "Do you like him or not?" "I like him," Tansy gave in. "But that doesn't mean we'll marry right away. We need time." Sophia seemed satisfied with the answer. She finished her ice cream and pushed the empty dish away. "I want him to be my dad too," she said seriously. "But only if you'll love him. For real." Tansy hugged her daughter, touched by her words. Even at 8 years old, Sophia understood what adults often fail to grasp. Without love, you can't build a family, no matter what advantages the marriage promises. "Let's go to bed," Tansy said. "Tomorrow will be a busy day." They went up to their rooms. Sophia quickly fell asleep, while Tansy sat by the window for a long time, gazing at the starry sky and thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. Just 2 days ago she had been a simple gas station cleaner, barely making ends meet. And now she was sitting in a luxurious mansion, discussing the possibility of marrying a millionaire's son. Like in a fairy tale. Only fairy tales usually end with the wedding of the prince and princess, and what happens afterward no one ever tells. In the morning they were awakened by a knock at the door. On the threshold stood Anna Davis with a tray holding steaming cups of cocoa and fresh croissants. "Good morning," the housekeeper smiled. "John Peterson asked me to tell you he expects you at breakfast in half an hour. And afterward you'll go shopping." "Thank you," Tansy accepted the tray. "We'll be down soon." Sophia, woken by the smell of cocoa, immediately rushed out of her room in unicorn pajamas. "Mom, is this for us?" "Real croissants, like in Paris." "Like in Paris, I don't know," Tansy smirked, "but they look delicious." They ate quickly, washed up, and dressed. Tansy put on her blue dress again, the only decent one in her wardrobe, while Sophia chose a yellow dress with a flared skirt. In the dining room, John Peterson and Stanley were waiting. Both looked serious but calm. Apparently, they too had had a talk. "Good morning, ladies," John Peterson rose to greet them. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," Tansy nodded, sneaking a glance at Stanley. He gave her a faint smile, and she understood. Everything was fine, their agreement still stood. Breakfast went by peacefully. No one mentioned yesterday's conversation about marriage. Instead, John Peterson talked about the shopping mall they were going to, while Stanley discussed with Sophia the book she had begun reading. After breakfast, John Peterson announced, "David is already waiting for us. We'll go to the Galleria. They have everything we need there." "And Stan?" Sophia asked. "Is he coming with us?" Stanley shook his head. "No, Sophia. I need to take care of some things." But tonight I'll be eager to hear what you bought. John Peterson, Tansy, and Sophia went out to the car. David, impeccably dressed as always, opened the doors of the black SUV for them. To the Galleria, John Peterson instructed. And call Marina, let her meet us there. We'll need a personal shopper. Tansy wanted to protest that they could manage on their own, but stayed silent. After all, she had no idea how to choose clothes in expensive boutiques. The ride took about an hour. The mall was in the city center. All the way, Sophia gazed out the window in delight, commenting on everything she saw. Mom, look, what a beautiful church. And there's a park. Can we go there later? John Peterson watched her excitement with a smile. Of course we'll go. To the park, the zoo, the circus. Wherever you want. At the mall entrance they were greeted by an elegant woman in her 40s. Marina, the personal shopper, John Peterson introduced her. John Peterson, good to see you, she greeted warmly. Are these the ladies for whom I should put together a wardrobe? Yes, Marina, John Peterson nodded. Tansy and her daughter Sophia. They need everything, from underwear to outerwear. And pay special attention to the beach collection. We're going to the seaside soon. Understood, Marina gave Tansy a professional once-over. You have an excellent figure, it won't be difficult to pick out clothes. What colors do you prefer? I don't know, Tansy faltered. I usually wear dark colors. They're more practical. Forget about practicality, Marina shook her head firmly. Deep shades of blue, emerald, burgundy will suit you. With your fair hair and blue eyes, it will look stunning. The next few hours turned into a kaleidoscope of fitting rooms, fabrics, cuts, and accessories for Tansy. Marina commanded like a general on the battlefield, rejecting some things and approving others. John Peterson occasionally voiced his opinion but mostly left the choices to the professional. By lunchtime, Tansy and Sophia already had an impressive list of purchases: dresses, suits, blouses, skirts, trousers, shoes of various styles, bags, scarves, jewelry, underwear, pajamas, swimsuits, and beach tunics. I think this is too much, Tansy tried to protest, but John Peterson was adamant. This is the bare minimum. You are now part of the Peterson family. And you must look the part. After lunch at the mall's restaurant, the shopping continued. This time they chose cosmetics, perfumes, hair and skincare products. For Sophia, they bought educational games, books, an art set, and even the latest model tablet. By evening, Tansy felt completely exhausted. Her head was spinning from the flood of impressions and the prices she had glimpsed on the tags. One dress cost as much as her 3-month salary at the gas station. Tired? John Peterson asked gently as they finally headed toward the exit. You'll get used to it. Shopping is tiring. I'll never get used to spending like this, Tansy admitted honestly. It's too much. It's a necessity, John Peterson countered. In our circle, appearance matters. Besides, he lowered his voice, Stanley will enjoy seeing a beautiful, elegantly dressed woman by his side. Tansy wanted to remind him that she and Stanley had only agreed on a temporary truce, but she kept silent. It wasn't worth ruining John Peterson's mood. Especially now that she knew about his illness. When they returned home, it was already late. Despite her fatigue, Sophia excitedly told Stanley, who was waiting for them in the living room, about all the purchases. And they bought me a dress just like Elsa's from Frozen. And sparkly shoes. And a swimsuit with a mermaid tail. Stanley listened with a smile, occasionally asking questions. Tansy watched them, noting how naturally they interacted. As if they had known each other for years. And what did they buy you, Tansy? Stanley asked when Sophia finally paused for breath. Everything, she spread her hands. Literally everything. From socks to evening gowns. Will you show me? There was a spark of interest in his eyes. Maybe, Tansy blushed. If there's ever a reason to wear any of it. There will be a reason, John Peterson said confidently. On Saturday we're going to a restaurant. All together. To celebrate your move. Stanley shot his father a quick glance but said nothing. He only nodded. All right. It's been a while since I went out among people. Later, when Sophia was already asleep and Tansy was sorting through the mountain of shopping bags, there was a quiet knock at her door. Come in, she thought it was Anna Davis. But standing on the threshold was Stanley in his wheelchair. Sorry for the late visit, he said. But I have news about Sophia's treatment. Good news. Come in, Tansy set aside the dress she had been folding. What news? Stanley rolled into the room and closed the door behind him. I called Professor Blackmore, he said. Discussed Sophia's symptoms with him, sent copies of the documents. He has a preliminary hypothesis. What kind? Tansy leaned forward, holding her breath. He thinks it may not be epilepsy, but a rare neurological condition. Temporal epileptiform activity caused by trauma. Possibly during that accident there was microdamage to the temporal lobe of the brain. That would explain why standard treatment doesn't work. Tansy listened with wide eyes. For the first time in all these years, someone spoke about Sophia's illness so concretely, with real understanding. And this can be treated? She asked with hope. The professor thinks yes, Stanley nodded. There's a special therapy, a new drug. And in the worst case, a microsurgical procedure. But for an accurate diagnosis, a special type of high-resolution MRI is required. Regular hospitals don't have such equipment. And where can it be done? In New York, at the Institute of Neurosurgery. Or in Germany, at the Charite Clinic. Blackmore works with both. Tansy pressed her hands to her chest. You really think Sophia can be cured? I'm not a doctor, Stanley answered cautiously. But Blackmore is a leading figure in neurology. If he believes there's a chance, then there really is one. Tansy felt tears welling in her eyes. For 5 years she had gone from doctor to doctor, and no one could help. And now, after just 2 days in the Petersons' house, there was real hope. Thank you, she said quietly. You can't imagine how much this means to me. I can imagine, Stanley smiled. I can see how much you love your daughter. It's moving. They fell silent. Tansy brushed away a tear, and Stanley tactfully pretended not to notice. By the way, he nodded at the clothes spread out. I see Father didn't skimp on the wardrobe. This is madness, Tansy shook her head. I've never spent so much on clothes. Not even in my entire life. You'll get used to it, Stanley smirked. Father loves grand gestures. Especially when he wants to make an impression. On whom? Me? On everyone. On you, on me, on those around us. He wants everyone to see, the Peterson family can afford the best. In his voice, Tansy caught a note of bitterness. Does it bother you? She asked cautiously. Sometimes, Stanley admitted. But I understand him. Father grew up in poverty. His parents barely made ends meet. For him, wealth is proof that he achieved something in life. And for you? Stanley thought for a moment. For me, money is opportunity. The chance not to depend on others, despite the wheelchair. The chance to do what interests me, not just what pays. The chance to help those less fortunate. Tansy looked at him in surprise. She had expected to hear anything but that. You're an extraordinary person, Stan, she said sincerely. Not at all what I imagined you to be. And what did you imagine? He asked with interest. Well, Tansy hesitated. Spoiled, capricious. Perhaps bitter because of the disability. I was like that, Stanley unexpectedly admitted. The first year after the accident. I yelled at nurses, threw things, refused treatment. I wanted to die. What changed? Tansy asked softly. I met someone who refused to pity me. Stanley looked past her, into the past. My rehabilitation instructor. He was disabled himself. Lost a leg in Iraq. He came and said, you can spend the rest of your life feeling sorry for yourself. Or you can learn to live again. Choose. And you chose life, Tansy finished for him. Yes, Stanley nodded. It was a hard road. Still is. But I don't regret it. He fell silent, and Tansy didn't press further. She felt Stanley had shared more than he usually told people he barely knew. All right, he seemed to shake himself back into the present. It's late. I won't keep you. Tomorrow we'll discuss the details of the upcoming consultation with the professor. Thank you for coming. Tansy walked him to the door. This is the best news I've had in years. Stanley nodded and wheeled out of the room. But Tansy sat for a long time on the bed among the scattered clothes, thinking about the strange turn of fate that had brought her to this house. And about the man who, despite his own struggles, was trying to help her daughter. Perhaps this marriage of convenience would not be as terrible as she had feared. The next few days flew by in the bustle of preparing for Professor Blackmore's arrival. John Peterson ordered one of the rooms to be converted into a temporary medical office, arranged for additional equipment. Stanley spent almost all his time at the computer, consulting doctors via video calls, studying medical literature. And Tansy and Sophia were settling into their new home, getting used to the luxury that surrounded them. Sophia adapted quickly. Children always accept change more easily. She made friends with the gardener, who showed her how to care for roses, spent hours splashing in the pool, and in the evenings listened to Stanley reading the Chronicles of Narnia. They were already on the third book. Tansy watched their interaction with wonder and joy. Stanley turned out to be patient and attentive. He never brushed off Sophia's endless questions, never pretended to be busy when she brought him a new book or drawing. With Tansy's daughter, he was a completely different man. Open, gentle, even cheerful. Nothing like the withdrawn, gloomy person she had met on the first day. On Friday evening, on the eve of their dinner at the restaurant, John Peterson invited Tansy into his study. Have a seat, he pointed to the chair opposite the massive oak desk. There's something we need to discuss. Tansy grew wary. What had this domineering, unpredictable man come up with now? Tomorrow we're going to the restaurant, John Peterson began. It's not just dinner. My business partners and friends will be there. Important people. And Tansy looked at him, puzzled. And I want to introduce you as Stanley's fiancée, John Peterson said directly. To officially announce the engagement. Tansy froze in shock. So that was it. John Peterson had decided to speed things up. But Stanley and I agreed not to rush, she cautiously objected. First Sophia's treatment, then. I know about your agreement, John Peterson cut her off. Stanley told me everything. But we don't have much time. He looked gaunt, tired. The illness, known only to Tansy, was clearly advancing. I'm not asking you to walk down the aisle immediately, John Peterson continued. Just to announce the engagement. It will give Stanley a certain status in society. It will show everyone that he is not just a cripple, but a man who has a future. A family. Do you understand? Tansy understood. John Peterson wanted to make sure that even after his death, Stanley would be treated with respect. Not as a helpless invalid, but as a full member of society. And what does Stanley think? She asked. Have you discussed it with him? No, John Peterson shook his head. He would have refused. But if you agree, if we present him with a fait accompli, I think he won't make a scene in public. Tansy frowned. She didn't like this plan. Deception, manipulation. All of it was foreign to her nature. I need to think, she said. And talk to Stanley. No. John Peterson slammed his palm on the desk. No talking to Stanley. It has to be a surprise. For everyone. A surprise? Tansy shook her head. You want me to propose to him? In front of everyone? Without asking his consent? Not me. John Peterson pulled a small velvet box from a drawer. You. He opened the box, and Tansy saw a ring with a large diamond, glittering in the lamplight. This was my late wife's ring, John Peterson explained. Stanley knows it. For him, it will be symbolic. Tansy stared at the ring, not knowing what to say. The whole thing seemed insane. How could she propose to a man she barely knew? In front of a crowd of strangers? I can't, she finally forced out. It's wrong. Stanley deserves to decide for himself. He mustn't be cornered. John Peterson looked at her for a long time, then sighed heavily and closed the box. All right, he agreed unexpectedly. You're right. It would be unfair to Stanley. He paused, then added. But I will still present you as his girlfriend. His future fiancée. Let people get used to the idea. Stanley too. Tansy understood there was no point in arguing. John Peterson was one of those people who always get their way. If not directly, then by going around. As you wish, she stood up. It's your choice. But I won't pretend more than necessary. You don't have to, John Peterson smiled faintly. Just be yourself. That's enough. Tansy left the study with a heavy heart. She didn't like being a pawn in someone else's game, even if the game was played with the best of intentions. When she returned to her room, she found Sophia and Stanley there. They were sitting on the floor, a large sketchbook spread between them. Mom, look! Sophia exclaimed happily. Stan's teaching me how to draw horses. Tansy looked at Stanley in surprise. You can draw? A little, he smiled sheepishly. I used to as a kid. Then I gave it up. But Sophia asked. On the sheet of paper was indeed a sketch of a horse. Quite skillful, with well-captured movement. Next to it lay Sophia's clumsy attempt to copy it. I can't do it as nicely as Stan, the girl sighed. But he says I just need to practice. That's right, Stanley nodded. No one's born an artist. Everything can be learned. He looked at Tansy, and she noticed that it was as if he was searching her eyes for approval. As if it mattered to him that she wasn't against his bond with Sophia. That's wonderful, she said sincerely. I didn't even know you had artistic inclinations, Sophia. I didn't either, the girl laughed. But Stan says I'm doing really well for a beginner. Very well, Stanley confirmed. Especially for a first attempt. They kept drawing while Tansy sat on the bed, watching them. Something in this picture, the man and the child, leaning over the sketchbook together, stirred a strange feeling in her. Warmth, comfort, almost like a family. And for the first time since John Peterson's proposal, she thought, what if they really could become a family? Not for convenience, not for money or illness, but for real. But she pushed the thought away immediately. Too soon. They barely knew each other. And she was still, in Stanley's eyes, the woman who had agreed to marry him for his father's money. Could he ever forget that? Forgive her that calculation? Unlikely. And it would be hard for her, too, to build a relationship on such shaky ground. What are you thinking about? Stanley asked, noticing her distant look. About tomorrow evening, Tansy admitted truthfully. Your father invited us to the restaurant. Yes, I know, Stanley nodded. Are you all right with it? If you'd rather not go, I can tell father. No, it's fine, Tansy hurried to assure him. It's just I'm not used to social events. Don't worry, Stanley smiled. It's not a royal reception. Just dinner with father's friends and partners. Nothing complicated. If only he knew what surprise John Peterson had in store. Tansy decided to keep silent. Maybe everything would turn out all right? Maybe John Peterson would change his mind? But she knew his kind too well. They never backed down from their plans. The Imperial Restaurant was located in the historic city center. An old building with columns, crystal chandeliers, and velvet drapes. Tansy, dressed in a dark blue evening gown with bare shoulders, Marina's choice, felt uncomfortable. Sophia had stayed home with Anna Davis. Children have no place at such events, John Peterson had decided. Don't be nervous, Stanley whispered as they entered the hall. He looked elegant in a black suit, clearly tailored with the wheelchair in mind. Just smile and nod when father introduces you to the guests. Easy for you to say, Tansy muttered, glancing around at the gathering. Men in expensive suits, women draped in diamonds, waiters with trays of champagne. A completely different world, alien and intimidating. Stanley. It's been ages. A tall gray-haired man approached them. Good to see you, my boy. Hello, Uncle Tony. Stanley shook his hand. Meet Tansy. A pleasure, the man gallantly kissed her hand. Anthony Johnson, an old family friend. You look stunning, Tansy. Stanley, you're a lucky man. Tansy smiled shyly, not knowing what to say. Stanley came to her rescue. Yes, I'm lucky. Tansy is not only beautiful but also smart. And she has a wonderful daughter. Daughter? Anthony Johnson raised his brows in surprise. A ready-made family then? Well done, wasting no time. Tansy noticed Stanley's shoulders tense. Despite his outward calm, it wasn't easy for him either. Soon other guests surrounded them. John Peterson appeared from the side, proudly introducing Tansy to everyone as Stanley's companion. Not fiancé, not wife, just companion. A vague term, leaving room for speculation. And where did you meet? Asked an elderly lady in a pearl necklace. At a gas station, Tansy answered honestly, not knowing what else to say. At a gas station? The lady raised her brows in surprise. Tansy worked at one of my gas stations, John Peterson interjected. I introduced them. Sometimes fate chooses unexpected paths, doesn't it? The lady smiled, but Tansy caught a glimmer of disapproval in her eyes. Did everyone already suspect she was here for the money? Let's go into the hall. John Peterson took her arm. Dinner is about to begin. They entered the banquet hall, where the tables were arranged in a U-shape. Tansy was seated between Stanley and an important-looking official in glasses. The conversation revolved around politics, business, overseas real estate, topics Tansy knew nothing about. Don't mind them, Stanley said quietly, noticing her unease. They love showing off to each other. Especially when there's a newcomer in the company. I feel out of place, she admitted. Like I've landed on another planet. Welcome to my world, Stanley gave a humorless smile. I'm not fond of these gatherings myself. But father insists I show my face. After the third course, Tansy counted 5 listed on the menu. John Peterson rose with a glass of champagne in hand. My dear friends, he began. I'm glad you could all come tonight. Especially pleased to see my son Stanley, who has finally honored us with his presence. Light laughter rippled through the hall. Stanley forced a smile. And of course, I'm delighted to introduce the lovely Tansy, John Peterson went on. A woman who, I'm certain, will soon become part of our family. Tansy froze. There it was. John Peterson had decided to announce the engagement after all. She cast a quick glance at Stanley. He looked just as stunned as she was. Father Stanley began, but John Peterson pressed on. I see how my son has flourished these past few days. All thanks to Tansy and her charming daughter Sophia. At last, our home has the sound of women's voices, laughter, warmth. Something we've lacked for so many years. The guests nodded approvingly. Some even started clapping. To Stanley and Tansy. John Peterson raised his glass. To their happy future. To Stanley and Tansy, the guests echoed. Tansy lifted her glass mechanically, wishing she could disappear from embarrassment. Stanley beside her looked just as unsettled but quickly composed himself and raised his glass too. Thank you, Father, he said. This is unexpected, but appreciated. John Peterson smiled in satisfaction and sat down. And Tansy realized that now she and Stanley were cornered. After such a public declaration, there was no way back. Dinner continued, but all attention remained fixed on them. The women studied Tansy with curiosity, the men clapped Stanley on the shoulder, congratulating him. Someone even began asking about the wedding date. We haven't decided yet, Stanley replied evasively. We're still getting to know each other. In my day, people didn't take long, remarked the elderly lady in pearls. If you decide to marry, marry. Otherwise, the bride might change her mind. She won't change her mind, John Peterson said firmly. Tansy and I have an agreement. Stanley shot his father a sharp look but kept silent. Tansy, however, wanted to sink through the floor. Agreement. What a degrading word. As if it were a business contract, not a marriage. After dinner, the guests spread through the hall, some dancing, others gathering in groups for conversation. Stanley wheeled himself toward the window, and Tansy followed. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't know he would do that. He spoke to me yesterday, but I refused to take part in this performance. I believe you, Stanley said, staring out the window without turning his head. That's father all over. Always gets his way, regardless of anyone else's opinion. What do we do now? Tansy asked helplessly. Play the roles we've been assigned, Stanley finally turned to her. At least for tonight. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we'll figure it out. He looked tired and dejected. Tansy wanted to comfort him somehow, but she didn't know how. After all, they were almost strangers, thrown into the same boat by circumstance. Stanley. A distinguished man in an expensive suit approached them. Congratulations. Your father told me about your fiancée. A wonderful choice. Thank you, William, Stanley forced a smile. Only, we're not officially engaged yet. Really? But your father said. The man hesitated. Well, no matter. What matters is that you finally found happiness. After everything you've been through. He glanced at the wheelchair, and Tansy noticed the twitch at the corner of Stanley's mouth. Yes, I'm very happy, he replied curtly. Excuse us, Tansy and I were just about to leave. Tomorrow is an important day. A professor from New York is coming to consult on Tansy's daughter. Of course, the man nodded quickly. I won't keep you. Very pleased to meet you, Tansy. When he left, Stanley turned to Tansy. Do you want to go? I really am tired. Gladly, she answered with relief. They found John Peterson surrounded by guests. He was in the middle of a story, and everyone was laughing. Father, we're leaving, Stanley said. Tansy needs to get back to her daughter, and I need to rest before tomorrow. So early? John Peterson frowned. Well, fine. David will take you. I'll stay. There are a couple of business matters I need to discuss. They rode in silence. Tansy stole glances at Stanley. He was staring out the window, lost in thought. His face was unreadable, but she saw the whitened knuckles gripping the armrest of his chair. At home, Sophia was already asleep. Anna Davis reported that the girl had spent the evening drawing horses, trying to practice Stanley's lesson, then had fallen asleep with a book in her hands. Thank you for watching her, Tansy said gratefully. How was she? No seizures? All was well, the housekeeper assured her. Sophia is a wonderful child. Easy to be with. When Anna Davis left, Stanley and Tansy were alone in the hall. I need a drink, Stanley said suddenly. Join me? Tansy hesitated. Part of her wanted to retreat to her room and think everything over. But she felt Stanley needed company now. All right, she agreed, but just for a little while. Tomorrow's important. They went into the library, a cozy room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a fireplace where logs crackled softly. Stanley wheeled over to the bar in the corner and took out a bottle of cognac. Would you prefer something else? Wine? Whiskey? Cognac is fine. Tansy sat down in an armchair by the fire. Just a little. Stanley poured 2 glasses and handed her one. They drank in silence. The cognac burned her throat, then spread warmth through her body. Tansy felt the tension of the evening begin to loosen. Sorry for the circus, Stanley said at last. Father, sometimes he crosses the line. Don't apologize, Tansy shook her head. He does what he thinks is right. In his own way. The problem is, his way often clashes with what others want. Stanley took another sip. It's been that way all my life. He decided for me where I'd go to college. Decided what field I'd work in. And now he's decided who I should marry, and you always obeyed? Tansy asked carefully. Not always, Stanley gave a wry smile. After the accident, I rebelled. Told him to go to hell with his rehabilitation plans, his doctors, his trainers. I decided I'd just lie there and wait to die. What changed? I told you already. My rehab instructor. He forced me to face the truth. Stanley changed. He understood that life hadn't ended. Even in the chair. Tansy watched him in the warm glow of the fire. A strong man. Broken by fate, but not defeated. You know, she said softly, I admire you. Me? Stanley raised his brows in surprise. Why? Because you didn't break. You didn't give up. You keep fighting. Stanley steadied her for a long moment, then looked away. You have no idea how often I wanted to give up. Especially in that first year. There were days when he stopped himself. Never mind. The past is the past. They sat in silence, watching the fire. Then Stanley asked suddenly, and you? Never wanted to give up? When things were especially hard with Sophia. Tansy flinched. No one had ever asked her that. Everyone always took it for granted that a mother must fight for her child, no matter the cost. Honestly? She looked at Stanley. There was one moment. Sophia was about 5. A particularly bad seizure. She didn't regain consciousness for nearly 24 hours. The doctors shrugged. There was no money for treatment. My husband had just left. I sat in the hospital corridor and thought that if Sophia died, it would be a release. For her. And for me. She expected condemnation, but Stanley only nodded. I understand. Sometimes the pain becomes unbearable. And it feels like the end would be better than endless torment. Yes, Tansy felt tears rising in her throat. But then Sophia opened her eyes. She looked at me and smiled. And I realized I would keep fighting. Always. No matter what. Stanley reached out and gently covered her hand with his. You're an extraordinary woman, Tansy. Strong. Genuine. They looked at each other, and something shifted between them. Something elusive, yet important. As if the wall they had both built was beginning to crumble. His born of pride, hers of fear. Stan, Tansy said quietly, I need to confess something to you. But she didn't have the chance. The library door swung open, and John Peterson appeared on the threshold. So here you are, he exclaimed. I've been searching the whole house for you. Stanley pulled his hand back and rolled away from Tansy. We were just talking, Father. What's happened? Professor Blackmore called. John Peterson was clearly agitated. He's arriving tomorrow earlier than planned. He'll be here at 8 in the morning. Everything must be prepared. At 8? Stanley frowned. Why so early? His plans changed. He needs to be in New York by evening. So he'll only spend half a day with us. Tansy stood. Then I need to rest. And prepare Sophia. She doesn't like waking up early. Of course, John Peterson nodded quickly. Go on. Stanley and I still have things to discuss. Tansy said goodbye and left the library. But she lingered at the door, overhearing the exchange between father and son. Well, are you satisfied, Father? Stanley's voice sounded weary. You made a spectacle of Tansy and me in front of all your friends. Don't exaggerate, John Peterson waved it off. I merely sped up the process. You two are too slow. And we don't have much time. Who doesn't? You? Me? Irritation edged Stanley's voice. Or are you hiding something again? A silence fell, and Tansy held her breath. Would John Peterson finally tell his son the truth about his illness? All of us are short on time, son, John Peterson said at last. Life is too short to waste on doubts. Especially when you've found a good person you're already starting to like. Don't deny it, I can see. Even if that's true, Stanley's voice softened, it's my decision. Not yours. Anything concerning you is my business, John Peterson said firmly. I'm your father. And I'll remain your father until my last breath. Tansy stepped quietly away from the door. She had heard enough. And now she knew for certain, tomorrow would be a turning point for all of them. Professor Blackmore, a silver-haired man with keen eyes, arrived precisely at 8 in the morning. He was accompanied by 2 assistants carrying medical equipment. Contrary to Tansy's fears, Sophia wasn't frightened. On the contrary, she examined the instruments with curiosity. An extraordinary case, the professor said after 3 hours of examinations. You were right, Stanley. A microtrauma of the temporal lobe, caused by an intrauterine concussion. Standard diagnostic methods don't detect it. Can it be treated? Tansy asked, her heart in her throat. Without question, Blackmore nodded. It will require a course of specialized therapy and possibly minimally invasive surgery. But the prognosis is good. In a year and a half, the girl will be completely cured. Tansy broke into tears of relief. Stanley, seated beside her, took her hand. Thank you, Professor, he said. You can't imagine what this means to us. John Peterson, watching the scene, nodded in satisfaction. His plan had worked. Stanley was already saying us, including himself and Tansy and Sophia's family. After the professor departed, they gathered in the living room. Sophia, exhausted from the tests, dozed on the couch. John Peterson poured champagne. To Sophia's health. And to our family. Wait, Father, Stanley raised his hand. Before we celebrate, we need to clarify something. There should be no secrets between us. He turned to Tansy. Yesterday in the library, you wanted to tell me something. What was it? Tansy drew a deep breath. The moment of truth had come. I wanted to tell you about your father. About his illness. Stanley froze. What illness? John Peterson paled. Tansy, we agreed. I'm sorry, but he has to know, she said firmly. Stanley, your father is sick. Cancer, terminal stage. The doctors give him no more than a year. Stanley stared at his father in shock. Is this true? John Peterson sank heavily into a chair. Yes. I didn't want to burden you. You've already endured too much. That's why you've been pushing this marriage, Stanley shook his head. You wanted to make sure someone would take care of me when you're gone. Not only that, John Peterson looked at his son. I wanted to see you happy. Before I leave. The room was filled with heavy silence. Tansy felt awkward, as though she had intruded on a deeply personal moment between father and son. I'll go put Sophia to bed, she said quietly, lifting her drowsy daughter from the couch. When she returned to the living room half an hour later, John Peterson and Stanley were still talking. From their tear-reddened eyes, she understood that a difficult but necessary conversation had taken place. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, John Peterson was saying. I thought it would break you. I'm not so easily broken, Stanley squeezed his father's hand. You taught me that yourself. Noticing Tansy, they fell silent. John Peterson rose. I'm going to rest. It's been a full day. When they were alone, Stanley looked at Tansy for a long time. Thank you for telling the truth. I had a right to know. I understand how hard this is for you, she replied softly. But the truth is better, no matter how bitter. Stanley nodded. Yes. The truth. He paused, then added. Now let's talk about our truth. About the deal my father offered you. I agreed to it out of desperation, Tansy admitted honestly. For Sophia's sake. But now everything has changed. What exactly? I have started to get to know you. The real you. Not a disabled man, not a millionaire's son, but a person. Strong, intelligent, kind. A person with whom I could. She hesitated, unable to finish. Be happy? Stanley asked quietly. In spite of this, he gestured toward the wheelchair. The chair doesn't matter. Tansy stepped closer. What matters is the kind of person you are. And you are extraordinary. Stanley reached out his hand, and she placed hers in it. You know, he said, I think Father, for all his faults, was right. Life is too short for doubts. Especially when you meet someone special. Tansy smiled through unbidden tears. So the deal is off? Yes, Stanley drew her closer. Instead, I'm offering something else. Something real. Without force or calculation. Simply because we want it. Tansy could hardly believe her happiness. Never had she imagined that despair would lead her to true love. In the months that followed, much changed. Sophia began treatment, and her seizures became less frequent. Stanley, inspired by the girl's progress, threw himself into his own rehabilitation with renewed energy. Tansy was surprised to learn that the strange machine she had once noticed was part of an experimental spinal cord recovery method. Their wedding was quiet and intimate. Only their closest friends attended, and of course, John Peterson, who, despite his progressing illness, held himself with dignity and even gave a touching toast. A year later, the Peterson house was filled with guests. Sophia, healthy and happy, darted between the tables in her festive dress, greeting everyone. John Peterson, thinner but carrying himself with his usual pride, received congratulations. And at the center of everyone's attention stood Stanley and Tansy, now husband and wife. Next to Stanley stood a pair of crutches, the result of a year of grueling training on that strange machine Tansy had once noticed. The doctors hadn't promised a full recovery, but even this was a true miracle. Are you happy? Stanley asked when they found a quiet moment alone. Very. Tansy placed her hand on her slightly rounded belly. We're all happy. Stanley covered her hand with his. Who would have thought it would turn out like this? Do you remember how it all began? I remember, Tansy smiled. I was a woman on the edge, ready to marry a paralyzed millionaire's son just to pay for my daughter's treatment. And became a loving wife who helped that paralyzed millionaire's son believe in himself again, Stanley finished. And the mother of his future child. From behind the trees, John Peterson appeared, leaning on a cane. The illness had receded. He was in a rare remission the doctors called a miracle. He walked slowly, but on his own, without help. Beside him ran Sophia, chattering animatedly. She called him Grandpa and adored spending time with him in his workshop, where John Peterson taught her woodworking. You know, Stanley said, watching them, sometimes the strangest and hardest decisions lead to the happiest outcomes. Yes, Tansy pressed closer to her husband. Sometimes you need to despair in order to find hope. And sometimes you need to accept a bargain in order to discover love. They watched Sophia and John Peterson coming toward them. Two people who had changed their lives. Two people for whom that strange bargain had once been struck, only to transform into something far greater. A true family.